They thought humans were just another primitive species to be crushed beneath the Galactic Empire's iron fist. They thought our scattered colonies and outdated weapons made us easy prey. They thought wrong. When the Zephyrian Armada descended upon Earth's outer colonies, they expected swift capitulation. Instead, they awakened something that had been dormant in humanity for centuries, something that had been forged in the fires of countless wars, tempered by survival against impossible odds, and refined by an unbreakable will to protect what we call home. The galaxy is about to learn why humans don't just fight to win. We fight to ensure our enemies never threaten anyone ever again. This is the story of how humanity's greatest weakness became the Empire's worst nightmare, and how a species that barely mastered faster-than-light travel brought the most powerful civilization in the galaxy to its knees. The Empire wanted a war. Humanity gave them extinction. Admiral Kethvar stood on the bridge of the Imperial dreadnought Eternal Dominion, his forearms crossed behind his back as he gazed through the massive viewport at the blue-green marble that hung in the void before them. Earth, the home world of the species that had dared to refuse the Galactic Empire's generous offer of submission. The Zephyrian's chitinous exoskeleton gleamed under the bridge's harsh lighting, and his compound eyes reflected the tactical displays that surrounded him. 67 worlds had fallen before his armada in the past 5 cycles. Each had eventually seen reason. Each had eventually knelt. The humans would be no different. "Sir," chirped Communications Officer Veltera from her station, her translator device converting her rapid clicks into standard galactic clicks. "The human delegation is requesting one final audience before we commence orbital bombardment." Kethvar's mandibles clicked in what passed for amusement among his species. "How tedious." "Very well. Put them through." The main view screen shimmered to life, revealing the weathered face of Admiral Sarah Chen, the human representative who had been speaking for Earth's United Colonial Defense Force. Her gray hair was pulled back in a military regulation bun, and her steel-blue eyes held a quality that Kethvar found unsettling. Not fear, but something else entirely. "Admiral Kethvar," Chen began, her voice steady despite the overwhelming firepower aimed at her homeworld. "I'm here to make one final plea. Withdraw your forces from human space. Leave our colonies in peace. This is your last chance to avoid a war that will consume you." Several of Kethvar's bridge crew emitted the chittering sounds that served as laughter among their kind. The Admiral himself allowed his mandibles to spread wide in a display of contempt. "Human, your words amuse me. You speak of war as if you have a choice in the matter. Your primitive ships cannot match even one of my escort frigates. Your weapons are centuries behind our technology. You have no allies, no reinforcements, no hope." Chen's expression didn't change. "We have something better. And what might that be? We have nothing left to lose." Kethvar's amusement deepened. "Fear has obviously addled your reasoning. You have your homeworld to lose. Your colonies. Your entire species." "No," Chen replied quietly. "You don't understand. Those things you threaten to take from us, they're not what we're afraid of losing. They're what we're willing to sacrifice to protect what really matters." "Which is?" Chen leaned forward slightly, and for just a moment Kethvar saw something in her eyes that made his chitin crawl. "Our future. Our children's children's children. The right to exist as free beings in this universe. You've made it clear that submission means slavery. Slavery means the slow death of everything that makes us human. So you've left us with only one option. Surrender," Kethvar stated. "Total war." The transmission cut, leaving the bridge in silence. Kethvar stared at the blank screen for a moment, then turned to his weapons officer. "Begin the bombardment. Target their major population centers first. Let them watch their civilization burn before we offer terms again." "Sir," the weapons officer reported after several moments of frantic activity at his console, "I'm detecting energy signatures from the planetary surface." "They appear to be charging weapons?" Kethvar's compound eyes focused on the tactical display. What manner of weapons could they possibly... The first beam lanced up from Earth's surface, a brilliant column of coherent energy that struck one of his escort cruisers amidships. The ship's shields flared brilliantly, then collapsed entirely. The beam continued to burn through armor that should have been impenetrable, carving through the vessel's superstructure like a blade through paper. Impossible! Kethvar breathed as he watched the cruiser break apart, its atmosphere venting in crystalline streams as emergency bulkheads failed one by one. Then the second beam fired. And the third. And the fourth. Evasive maneuvers, Kethvar roared, but it was too late. The massive dreadnought, built to intimidate through sheer size rather than maneuverability, lurched ponderous to starboard. The beam meant for the eternal dominion instead struck the heavy cruiser subjugator, punching clean through its reactor core. The explosion lit up the space around Earth like a new sun, and when the glare faded, debris was all that remained of a ship that had previously conquered 14 star systems. "Status report," Kethvar demanded as alarms blared throughout the bridge. "We've lost 3 cruisers and 4 destroyers," his tactical officer reported, his voice high with panic. "Sir, the energy readings from those planetary weapons are impossible. They're generating more power than our entire task force combined." On the view screen, Earth hung serene and beautiful, seemingly unchanged, but Kethvar could see the new installations that had risen from its surface. Massive structures that gleamed like metal mountains, their surfaces crackling with barely contained energy. "How?" he whispered. "Their technology was centuries behind ours. How could they have built such weapons without our knowledge?" The answer came in the form of another transmission. Admiral Chen's face reappeared on the screen, but this time she wasn't alone. Behind her, Kethvar could see what looked like a command center filled with alien technology. Sleek, organic curves that seemed almost grown rather than built, and standing beside Chen were figures in environmental suits that Kethvar recognized with dawning horror. Etherians, the ancient species that had vanished from the galaxy 3 million years ago, leaving behind only empty worlds and incomprehensible ruins. The species whose technology was so advanced that the Empire had built its entire civilization on pale imitations of their simplest devices. "You're wondering how," Chen said, her voice carrying an edge of satisfaction. "The answer is simple. When you started conquering human colonies 5 years ago, we did what humans do best. We adapted. We reached out to species you'd written off as extinct or irrelevant. We offered them something you never could. Which was? Respect. Partnership. The chance to rebuild what you destroyed." Chen gestured to one of the figures beside her. "The Etherians have been hiding in the spaces between dimensions, watching as you Zephyrians built an empire on the bones of the civilizations you exterminated. They've been waiting for someone worthy of their trust." The Etherian stepped forward and spoke in a voice like crystal bells chiming. The translator rendered it as humanity proved their worth not through conquest, but through their willingness to sacrifice themselves for others. When the Empire attacked the Centauri colonies, human ships threw themselves against impossible odds to buy time for civilians to escape. When the bombardment of New Geneva began, human soldiers stayed behind to ensure the evacuation ships could flee to safety. Kethvar's mind reeled. The reports from those battles had portrayed the human resistance as fanatical desperation, not heroic sacrifice. His commanders had recommended psychological warfare to break the humans' will to fight, not understanding that every defeat only strengthened their resolve. "The Etherians taught us that true strength isn't measured in the size of your fleet or the power of your weapons," Chen continued. "It's measured in what you're willing to endure to protect those who cannot protect themselves. You've spent so long being predators that you've forgotten what it means to face real prey." Another beam fired from Earth's surface, this one targeted at the communications array of Kethvar's flagship. The massive structure, which had taken decades to construct and could broadcast across half the galaxy, simply ceased to exist. "You wanted to show us the futility of resistance," Chen said. "Instead, you've shown us the futility of your empire." "You rule through fear because you've forgotten how to inspire loyalty." You conquer because you've forgotten how to create. You destroy because you've forgotten how to build something worth preserving. Kethvar found his voice. You cannot hope to stand against the full might of the Empire. This is one fleet of many. When word of this attack reaches the capital, Chen interrupted. 3 hours ago, human ships launched simultaneous strikes against every major Imperial installation within 50 light-years. Your communications networks are being systematically dismantled. Your supply lines are being severed. Your reinforcements are already under attack. The tactical display confirmed her words. Red warning lights indicated lost contact with outpost after outpost. Fleet bases that had anchored Imperial power in this sector were going dark one by one. But that's impossible, Kethvar protested. You have perhaps 200 ships in your entire fleet. We have thousands. You had thousands, Chen corrected. But you made a critical error. You assumed that because we were outnumbered, we were outmatched. You never considered that being outnumbered might be exactly the condition under which humans fight best. The view screen shifted to show tactical recordings from across human space. Kethvar watched in growing disbelief as small formations of human ships, heavily modified with Etherian technology, struck Imperial forces with surgical precision. They didn't engage in the massive fleet battles that the Empire preferred. Instead, they hit supply convoys, isolated patrol squadrons, and communication relays. They struck hard, struck fast, and vanished before reinforcements could arrive. But it wasn't just the technology that made them so effective. It was their coordination. Imperial forces fought as individuals, each captain seeking personal glory. Human forces fought as a single organism, each ship willing to sacrifice itself to ensure the mission's success. Where Imperial captains would retreat to preserve their careers, human captains would press forward regardless of the cost. We studied every battle you've ever fought, Chen explained as the recordings continued to play. We learned your tactics, your strategies, your weaknesses. You fight like apex predators, powerful but predictable. We fight like pack hunters. We might not be as strong individually, but we're stronger together. Another explosion lit the space around Earth as the orbital platform Zirian's Hammer suffered a catastrophic reactor failure. The installation, which had been prepared to broadcast the Empire's terms of surrender to the human homeworld, instead became a brief star before collapsing into wreckage. Admiral, his second-in-command whispered urgently, we should retreat, regroup with the remaining Imperial forces, plan a proper response. Kethvar's pride warred with his survival instinct. The Zephyrian Empire had not maintained its dominance for 3 millennia by knowing when to withdraw from an untenable position. But it had also not maintained that dominance by accepting defeat from primitives. Sir, the tactical officer called out, I'm detecting multiple hyperspace signatures. Unknown ships decloaking throughout the system. The view screen split to show dozens of new contacts appearing on the sensors. Ships of designs that Kethvar had never seen before, sleek, organic curves that seemed to bend light around them. But mixed among them were vessels he recognized with a chill that penetrated to his bones. Valorian dreadnoughts, Kephrite battlecruisers, Sindathi carriers, ships belonging to species that the Empire had declared extinct, their worlds scoured clean and their civilizations erased from galactic memory. The Empire told the galaxy that these species chose to destroy themselves rather than accept Imperial rule, Chen said, her voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. That was a lie. They didn't choose destruction, they chose exile. They've been waiting in the dark spaces between stars, building their strength, preparing for the day when someone would stand up to the Empire and give them a chance to reclaim what was stolen from them. The assembled fleet was massive, easily 3 times the size of Kethvar's original armada. But more than their numbers, it was their coordination that truly demonstrated their threat. Ships from a dozen different species moved in perfect harmony, their various technologies seamlessly integrated into a single, overwhelming force. You came here expecting to find a primitive species ripe for conquest, Chen continued. Instead, you found the nucleus of a rebellion that spans half the galaxy, Every species you've oppressed, every world you've enslaved, every civilization you've tried to erase, they've all been waiting for this moment. Kefar watched helplessly as his remaining ships were systematically disabled, not destroyed, disabled. The enemy fleet showed a restraint that the Empire had never bothered with, targeting weapons and engines while leaving life support intact. They were taking prisoners, not simply eliminating threats. "This is your one opportunity," Chen said finally. "Surrender now, and you'll be treated according to the same laws of war that the Empire has spent centuries ignoring. Your crews will be imprisoned but not harmed. You'll be given trials, not summary executions. Refuse, and we'll demonstrate why humans have a reputation for being creative when it comes to warfare." The admiral looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew. Fear had replaced arrogance, and desperation had replaced confidence. The mighty Imperial war machine had been reduced to scrap in a matter of hours by a species they had dismissed as irrelevant. For the first time in his long military career, Admiral Kethavar gave the order to surrender. Captain Marcus Rivera stood in the observation deck of the newly christened UCS Defiance, watching as the last of the Imperial prison ships departed Sol system under heavy escort. The sight of Zephyrian vessels flying in formation with human destroyers still seemed surreal, even 3 weeks after Admiral Kethavar's surrender. "Strange how quickly the galaxy can change," commented Dr. Elena Vasquez as she joined him at the viewport. The xenobiologist had been instrumental in establishing communication protocols with the various alien species that had emerged from hiding to join humanity's cause. "The galaxy hasn't changed," Marcus replied, his weathered face reflecting the starlight streaming through the transparent aluminum. "We just finally saw it for what it really was." Elena nodded thoughtfully. As one of the lead researchers working with Etherian technology, she had access to historical databases that revealed the true scope of the Empire's atrocities. Entire species reduced to scattered refugee populations, worlds stripped of resources and abandoned to die. Civilizations that had taken millions of years to develop, snuffed out in decades of systematic exploitation. "Any word from the Outer Rim expeditions?" Marcus asked. "The Sindathi scouts report successful contact with 3 more survivor enclaves," Elena replied, consulting her tablet. "The Trelni are mobilizing their hidden fleet from the asteroid fields around Proxima Vega, and the Kefrites have agreed to share their stealth technology in exchange for medical assistance with their reproductive crisis." Marcus smiled grimly. The Empire's greatest strength, its vast size, was becoming its greatest weakness. Communication across such distances took time, even with quantum entanglement networks. By the time Imperial Central Command learned of the rebellion in human space, the revolution would have spread to dozens of systems. "Dr. Vasquez," came a voice from the intercom. "Please report to Conference Room Alpha." Priority 1. Elena and Marcus exchanged glances. Priority 1 meant either very good news or very bad news, and given the current situation, both were equally likely. The conference room was already crowded when they arrived. Admiral Chen sat at the head of the table, flanked by her human staff and several alien representatives. The ethereal figure of Ambassador Zafine dominated one side of the room, the Etherian's translucent form shimmering with contained energy. Across from the ancient being sat war leader Gorthak of the Valoraians, his massive frame barely fitting in the reinforced chair designed for his species. "Now that we're all here," Admiral Chen began, "I'll get straight to the point. Our intelligence networks have intercepted Imperial communications from the core worlds. They know what happened here." A holographic display materialized above the table, showing a 3-dimensional map of the galaxy. Red zones indicated Imperial-controlled territory, which still covered roughly 60% of inhabited space. Blue zones marked the growing rebellion, spreading outward from human space like ink in water. "Emperor Vexthon has declared humanity and our allies to be a galactic-level threat," Chen continued. "He's mobilizing the 5th, 7th, and 9th Imperial fleets. Combined, they represent nearly a third of the Empire's total military strength. War leader Gorthak's massive fist struck the table, making the hologram flicker. "Let them come," he rumbled in his bass voice. "My people have waited 800 years to face Zephyrian fleets in open battle. We welcome the opportunity." Ambassador Zephian's form pulsed with what Elena had learned to recognize as concern. Numbers alone will not determine the outcome of this conflict. The Zephyrians have had centuries to perfect their military doctrine. They will not make the same mistakes that Admiral Kethvar made, which is exactly why we're not going to fight them the way they expect, Marcus interjected. "Elena, show them the analysis." Dr. Vasquez activated her own tablet, and the hologram shifted to display detailed schematics of Imperial fleet formations. "We've been studying captured tactical databases from the ships we disabled at Earth. The Empire's entire military strategy is based on the assumption that they'll face conventional forces using conventional tactics." She highlighted specific formations with laser pointers built into her tablet. Imperial battle groups are designed to crush enemy fleets through superior firepower and ship-to-ship combat. They excel at large-scale engagements where they can bring their numerical and technological advantages to bear. "But they have critical vulnerabilities," Marcus added. "Their command structure is rigidly hierarchical. Individual captains have little autonomy to adapt to changing conditions. Their logistics networks assume friendly territory and establish supply lines. And most importantly, they've never faced an enemy that could match their technology while maintaining superior tactical flexibility." War leader Gorthak leaned forward, his scarred features creasing in thought. "You propose to avoid direct confrontation?" "We propose to make direct confrontation impossible," Admiral Chen answered. "The Empire wants to fight us fleet to fleet, system to system, the way they've always fought. Instead, we're going to fragment their forces, disrupt their communications, and force them to fight a war they're not prepared for." The hologram shifted again, this time showing the Imperial advance routes toward human space. 3 massive fleets were indeed converging on the region, but their movements followed predictable patterns based on established hyperspace lanes and strategic objectives. "Dr. Vasquez has been working with the Etherians to modify our FTL technology," Chen explained. "Instead of relying on fixed hyperspace routes, we can now travel through dimensional fold space. It takes longer, but it allows us to bypass Imperial detection networks." Ambassador Zephian's form brightened slightly. "The fold space technique was developed by my people during our exile. It enables a small force to appear anywhere in the galaxy without warning. However, it cannot accommodate large fleets." "Which is perfect for our purposes," Marcus said. "We're not trying to match the Empire ship for ship. We're trying to destroy their ability to fight as a unified force." Elena activated a new display showing potential target lists. Imperial fleets require constant resupply of fuel, ammunition, and replacement parts. Their ships are powerful, but they're also incredibly complex and resource-intensive. Every major fleet has a tail of supply vessels that stretches back hundreds of light years. The strategic picture became clear as she continued the briefing. "If we can sever those supply lines, even the mightiest Imperial dreadnoughts become floating derelicts within weeks. Their fusion reactors need specially refined fuel that can only be produced at major industrial installations. Their weapon systems require rare earth elements that are mined from specific worlds. Their computer cores need quantum processors that are manufactured at secure facilities." War leader Gorthak's expression shifted from skepticism to appreciation. "You would starve them rather than fight them." "We would fight them," Admiral Chen corrected, "but on our terms, not theirs." Small task forces hitting supply convoys and industrial targets, stealth missions to sabotage production facilities, information warfare to disrupt their command networks. By the time their main fleets reach our territory, they'll be operating at half strength and facing an enemy they can't pin down. The hologram updated to show the proposed operation in detail. Dozens of small human task forces, reinforced with alien specialists, would penetrate deep into Imperial territory using fold space technology. Each group would target critical infrastructure, fuel refineries, weapons factories, communication relays, and supply depots. The beauty of this strategy, Elena added, is that it's self-reinforcing. Every successful strike will liberate more alien survivors who can join the rebellion. Every facility we destroy will force the Empire to divert resources from their main fleets to protect their remaining installations. Ambassador Zephien's form flickered with what Elena had learned to interpret as excitement. My people have maintained detailed records of Imperial industrial capacity. We can provide targeting information for installations that the Empire believes are completely secret. The Kephrites can provide stealth technology that will make our ships nearly invisible to Imperial sensors, added Commander Telshok, speaking for the first time since the meeting began. The insectoid aliens' compound eyes reflected the holographic displays as they calculated possibilities. War Leader Gorthak stood slowly, his massive frame casting shadows across the table. The Valorians have maintained a warrior tradition for 8 centuries, preparing for the day we could reclaim our homeworld from the Empire. If this strategy can accomplish that goal, you have our full support. Admiral Chen looked around the table, gauging the reactions of the various representatives. This won't be easy. We're talking about coordinating operations across thousands of light years, maintaining communication security across dozens of species with different technologies, and keeping our forces supplied while operating deep in enemy territory. The alternative is facing 3 Imperial fleets in direct combat with our current resources, Marcus pointed out. Even with Etherian technology, we'd be outnumbered at least 4-1. There's another consideration, Elena said quietly. Intelligence reports suggest that the Emperor has authorized the use of planet killers if the rebellion spreads too far. We're not just fighting for military victory, we're fighting to prevent genocide on a galactic scale. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. The Empire had used planet killers before, usually as warnings to systems considering rebellion. Entire worlds reduced to lifeless rocks to discourage resistance elsewhere. If Emperor Vexthan was willing to deploy such weapons against the current rebellion, billions of lives hung in the balance. Then we don't give him the chance, Admiral Chen said finally. Operation Cascade begins in 72 hours. Dr. Vasquez, I want targeting packages for the first wave of strikes ready within 24 hours. War Leader Gorthak, can your people have their stealth ships in position by the deadline? My warriors have been ready for 800 years, the Valoran replied. They will be ready now. Ambassador Zephien's form pulsed with determination. The Etherians will provide fold space navigation data for all strike teams. The Empire will discover what it means to face an enemy they cannot find, cannot predict, and cannot escape. As the meeting dispersed, Elena found herself walking alongside Marcus toward the ship's main laboratory complex. The UCS Defiance had been designed as a mobile research platform, equipped with the most advanced human and alien technology available. It would serve as the coordination center for the rebellion's intelligence operations. Do you think it will work? She asked as they passed through corridors lined with quantum computers and alien analytical equipment. Marcus considered the question carefully. The strategy is sound. We have the technology and the allies to implement it. The question is whether we can maintain coordination across such a vast operation without the Empire detecting our communications. The Etherians believe their dimensional communication network is undetectable, Elena replied. It operates on principles that Imperial science hasn't even theorized yet. They paused at the entrance to Elena's laboratory, where teams of human and alien scientists worked around the clock to integrate different technologies into coherent systems. Through the transparent walls, she could see a Kephrite engineer working alongside a human physicist to calibrate stealth generators, while an Etherian advisor observed their progress with serene patience. You know, Marcus said thoughtfully, 6 months ago, if someone had told me I'd be planning military operations with species I'd never heard of, using technology I couldn't understand, against an empire that spans half the galaxy, I'd have recommended them for psychiatric evaluation. Elena laughed, the first genuine moment of humor she'd experienced in weeks. 6 months ago, if someone had told me I'd be having telepathic conversations with energy beings from another dimension, I'd have agreed with your recommendation. Their moment of levity was interrupted by an urgent chime from Elena's communicator. "Dr. Vasquez, please report to the sensor array. We're detecting anomalous readings from the edge of the system." Elena and Marcus exchanged concerned looks before hurrying toward the nearest transit tube. The sensor array was located at the forward section of the ship, surrounded by the most sophisticated detection equipment that human and alien science could devise. Lieutenant Torres, the ship's sensor specialist, looked up from his console with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. "Doctor, you need to see this. We're detecting fold space distortions at the system's edge, but they're not matching any of our navigation profiles." Elena studied the readouts, her expertise in alien technology allowing her to interpret the complex data streams. "The quantum signatures are wrong. This isn't Etherian fold space technology." "Could it be another refugee species making contact?" Marcus suggested. "Negative," Torres replied. "The energy patterns are too organized, too systematic." "This looks like a reconnaissance probe of some kind." Elena's blood ran cold as she realized the implications. "Get me a direct line to Admiral Chen immediately. I think the Empire has developed their own fold space technology." As alarms began to sound throughout the ship, Elena couldn't help but wonder if humanity's advantage in mobility was about to disappear. The rebellion had been built on the assumption that they could strike at will while remaining undetected. If the Empire could match their stealth and speed capabilities, the entire strategic balance would shift dramatically. The war was about to become far more complicated. Commander Lisa Park crouched behind the twisted remains of what had once been a plasma conduit, her breathing regulated to minimize the sound of her exhalation. The Imperial Research Facility on Zarian 7 had been supposed to be an easy target, a lightly defended industrial complex that produced quantum processors for Imperial ship computers. Intelligence had indicated minimal security and no significant military presence. Intelligence had been catastrophically wrong. "Phantom leader to all units," she whispered into her throat mic, using the low-frequency bands that their alien allies had assured them were undetectable by Imperial sensors. "Situation has changed. This facility is crawling with Zephyrian special forces. I count at least 3 full squadrons." The responses came back in whispers from her scattered team. Sergeant Reynolds was pinned down in the main assembly hall. Corporal Chen had managed to reach the computer core but was trapped there by patrol units. Lieutenant Martinez was somewhere in the ventilation system trying to reach the backup power generators. What should have been a simple sabotage mission had turned into a nightmare of narrow escapes and desperate improvisation. The Imperial forces weren't just present, they were waiting. "They'd known the strike team was coming, Commander," came Chen's voice tight with strain. "I've accessed the facility's security logs. They've been expecting us for 3 days. This was a trap." Park closed her eyes and tried to think. The rebellion's intelligence network had been flawless so far. Every target had been exactly as described, every security measure precisely predicted. The possibility of betrayal was minimal. The information had come directly from Etherian databases, and the ancient beings had no reason to deceive their new allies, which meant the Empire had found another way to stay one step ahead. "All units, this is abort code Zulu," she transmitted. "Return to extraction point immediately. Whatever intel we came for isn't worth walking into an obvious ambush." But as she began to move toward the facility's outer perimeter, Park realized that extraction might not be possible. Through the transparent aluminum windows, she could see the distinctive silhouettes of Imperial assault shuttles settling onto the facility's landing pads. Fresh troops were being deployed to seal off every possible escape route. Her tactical implant chimed softly, indicating an incoming priority transmission on the Rebellion's secure command channel. She activated it, hoping for instructions from Admiral Chen or news that reinforcements were en route. Instead, she heard a voice that made her blood freeze. Commander Park said Emperor Vaxthon himself, his words translated from the clicking syllables of the Zephyrian language. "I trust you're finding your mission more challenging than anticipated." Park's training kicked in immediately. She switched her communicator to broadcast mode, ensuring that her entire team would hear the conversation. If this was going to be her final mission, she wanted her people to know exactly what they were facing. "Your Imperial Majesty," she replied, keeping her voice level despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "I'm flattered that someone of your stature would take personal interest in such a small operation." The Emperor's laughter was like the sound of breaking glass. "Small operation, my dear Commander? You underestimate your own importance. You and your team represent something far more significant than a mere sabotage mission." "Which is?" "Proof that humanity can be outmatched. Proof that your rebellion's vaunted technological advantages can be neutralized. Proof that even your alien allies cannot protect you from the inevitable consequences of defying the Empire." Through the facility's windows, Park could see more Imperial vessels arriving, not just troop transports but heavy cruisers and battle platforms. The Empire was committing serious resources to what should have been a minor industrial target. "You see, Commander, your species has presented us with an interesting problem. Your unpredictable tactics and alien allies have made conventional military responses insufficient, so we have adapted." Park's tactical implant was analyzing the Imperial ship formations, and what she saw made her stomach clench. The vessels were arranged in a search pattern that would make fold space escape impossible. Somehow, they had found a way to detect and counter the dimensional technology that had given the rebellion its mobility advantage. 3 months ago, the Emperor continued, "We captured several of your strike teams during failed operations in the Centauri sector. At first, they proved remarkably resistant to conventional interrogation techniques. Humans, we discovered, possess an unusually high tolerance for physical discomfort when properly motivated." Park's jaw tightened. The rebellion had lost contact with several teams in that sector, but they'd assumed the missions had simply failed due to unexpected resistance or equipment malfunction. The possibility of capture and interrogation had been considered, but the teams carried quantum scramblers that should have wiped their memories clean if they were compromised. However, Vexthon went on, "We found that different species have different vulnerabilities. The Valorian prisoners broke when we threatened to execute captured human civilians. The Kephrite subjects proved surprisingly cooperative when we demonstrated our willingness to damage their egg sacs. And the Etherian," the transmission paused and Park could hear something that sounded like satisfaction in the Emperor's voice. "The Etherian was most informative once we learned how to inflict pain on a being of pure energy." "Did you know that their consciousness can be fragmented using resonance weapons? It's quite fascinating to observe." Park felt sick. The rebellion's security protocols assumed that captured personnel would either escape quickly or die before they could be compromised. They hadn't accounted for the Empire's willingness to torture not just the captives themselves, but anyone connected to them. "The intelligence we gathered from those interrogations has been comprehensive. We now know the location of your hidden bases, the specifications of your modified ships, the identities of your key personnel, and the operational details of your next 50 planned missions." Through her peripheral vision, Park could see Imperial soldiers moving through the facility. They weren't searching randomly. They knew exactly where her team was positioned. Every hiding spot, every potential escape route, every piece of cover had been anticipated. "But more importantly," the Emperor continued, "we learned about your alien allies' technologies. Fold space navigation is remarkably simple once you understand the underlying principles. Dimensional communication networks can be monitored if you have the proper equipment. Stealth systems become useless when you know their specific frequency signatures." Park's communicator crackled as her team members began reporting increasingly desperate situations. Reynolds was surrounded. Chen was taking fire from multiple directions. Martinez had been captured attempting to reach the ventilation system. "The trap you find yourself in, Commander, is merely the first of many. While we speak, similar operations are being conducted at 17 other rebellion targets. Your comrades are discovering that their technological advantages have become technological vulnerabilities." The tactical display on Park's implant showed the grim reality of their situation. Imperial forces were systematically closing off every possible avenue of escape. Her team was being herded like animals toward a central kill zone where overwhelming firepower waited. "Why?" Park asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. If you have all this intelligence, why not just strike at our main bases? Why bother with these elaborate traps? Because, my dear Commander, breaking your rebellion requires more than military victory. It requires breaking the spirit that drives your resistance. Your species and your allies must learn that defiance leads not to glorious battle, but to inevitable capture, interrogation, and execution. Park closed her eyes and made a decision that went against every instinct of self-preservation she possessed. All units, this is Commander Park. We are compromised beyond recovery. Implement Protocol 7 immediately. Protocol 7 was the rebellion's final contingency, complete destruction of all equipment, data, and personnel to prevent further intelligence from falling into Imperial hands. It was designed to be used when capture was inevitable and rescue was impossible. "Acknowledged, Commander," came Reynolds' voice, steady despite his desperate circumstances. "It's been an honor serving with you." Similar confirmations came from the rest of her team. They all understood what Protocol 7 meant. They all accepted it. But before Park could activate the quantum charges built into her equipment, her communicator emitted a sound she'd never heard before, a high-pitched harmonic that seemed to bypass her ears entirely and resonate directly in her brain. The Emperor's laughter stopped abruptly. What was that? Park felt a strange sensation, as if the air around her was becoming thicker and more viscous. The facility's lights began to flicker, and she could hear the Imperial soldiers shouting in confusion as their equipment began to malfunction. "Commander Park," came a new voice over her communicator, one that seemed to speak directly into her mind without using sound at all. "This is Warsinger Velneth of the Sindathi fleet. We have arrived to extract you and your team. Prepare for immediate dimensional translation." Park had heard of the Sindathi but had never encountered them directly. They were one of the more mysterious species that had joined the rebellion, survivors of a civilization that the Empire had believed completely exterminated. Their ships were rumored to operate on principles that bordered on the mystical. The sensation of thickening air intensified, and Park watched in amazement as the walls around her began to become translucent. She could see through them to where her team members were positioned, and beyond them to where Imperial soldiers were frozen in place like statues. "Do not be alarmed," Velneth's voice continued. "We are shifting you and your team into phase space. The Imperial forces cannot perceive or interact with you while you remain in this state." Park looked down at her hands and saw that they had taken on the same translucent quality as the walls. She could still move and think normally, but she felt somehow disconnected from the normal flow of time and space. "Move toward your extraction point," Velneth instructed. "The phase shift will protect you from Imperial weapons and sensors, but it cannot be maintained indefinitely." As Park began to move, she found that she could pass through solid barriers as if they were made of mist. Walls, floors, and equipment offered no resistance. She could see her team members doing the same, moving through the facility like ghosts. The Imperial soldiers were still frozen, their faces locked in expressions of confusion and alarm. But Park could see that some of them were beginning to move slightly, as if whatever force had immobilized them was gradually weakening. "Hurry, Commander," Velneth urged. "The Zephyrians have begun to deploy resonance weapons. They cannot harm you while phase shifted, but they can disrupt our ability to maintain the dimensional barrier." Park reached the facility's outer perimeter just as the first of her team members arrived at the extraction point. A Sindathi vessel hung in the air above them, its organic curves seeming to bend light and shadow in impossible ways. It looked less like a machine and more like a living creature that had learned to swim through space. Beams of brilliant energy began to lance upward from the Imperial positions, but they passed harmlessly through Park and her team. The phase shift technology was unlike anything she had encountered, more sophisticated than Etherian fold space, more elegant than Kephrite stealth systems. "Translation commencing," Velneth announced as Park felt herself being drawn upward toward the Sindathi ship. "You will experience momentary disorientation as we return you to normal spacetime." The sensation was like falling in reverse, accompanied by a brief moment of vertigo as reality reasserted itself. Park found herself standing in what looked more like a garden than a spacecraft interior, surrounded by bioluminescent plants and flowing water features. War singer Velneth stood before them, and Park had to suppress a gasp of surprise. The Sindathi looked almost human, but with skin that seemed to contain swirling patterns of light and eyes that held depths like looking into nebulae. They were beautiful in a way that suggested otherworldly grace. "Welcome aboard the Dimensional Chorus," Velneth said, their voice now audibly spoken rather than telepathically transmitted. "Your extraction was successful, though I fear the Imperial trap was more sophisticated than our intelligence suggested." "How did you know we needed help?" Park asked. "The Sindathi maintain a continuous watch over all rebellion operations. When we detected Imperial resonance weapons being deployed around your target, we knew that you had been betrayed." Velneth's expression darkened. "We also detected something else. The Emperor was not merely gloating about his tactical success. He was broadcasting your capture to rebellion forces throughout the galaxy." Park felt cold dread creep through her system. He wanted other teams to know we'd been compromised. He wanted to spread fear and uncertainty through our ranks. "More than that," Velneth confirmed. "He wanted to demonstrate that the Empire has learned to counter your technological advantages. Every rebellion cell that witnessed your capture will now doubt the effectiveness of their own stealth and mobility systems." Through the ship's organic walls, Park could see other Sindathi vessels emerging from phase space around the Imperial facility. But instead of attacking, they seemed to be doing something else, their hulls pulsing with rhythmic patterns of light that created complex geometric forms in the darkness. "What are they doing?" Park asked. Velneth's expression shifted to something that might have been satisfaction. "They are singing the destruction song. Emperor Vexthon believes he has gained a psychological victory by capturing your mission. He is about to learn that the Sindathi do not forgive the torture of our allies." The light patterns from the Sindathi ships began to resonate with each other, creating harmonics that Park could feel in her bones. The effect was hypnotic and beautiful, but she sensed an enormous power building behind the display. "The Sindathi were artists before the Empire forced us to become warriors," Velneth explained. "Our ships are instruments, our weapons are songs, and our battles are performances that reshape reality itself. The Emperor has just provided us with an audience." The resonance reached a crescendo, and the Imperial facility below simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed in an explosion, not reduced to wreckage, it simply faded from existence as if it had never been built. The Imperial ships nearby flickered and began to dissolve like mirages, their hulls becoming transparent before disappearing entirely. "How?" Park whispered. "Music has power when properly applied." Velneth replied serenely. "The Sindathi learned to compose reality rather than simply observe it. The Empire may have gained intelligence about your rebellion's methods, but they know nothing of ours." As the Dimensional Chorus began to accelerate away from the vanishing Imperial forces, Park realized that the rebellion's advantages were far more diverse than she had understood. Each alien species brought not just ships and weapons, but entirely different approaches to technology and warfare. The Empire had learned to counter human tactics and Etherian technology, but they were completely unprepared for Sindathi reality manipulation. "Commander," Velneth said, "your mission was not a failure. It was a revelation. The Empire has shown us that they can predict and counter conventional resistance. Therefore, we must become unconventional in ways they cannot imagine." Park nodded, already beginning to understand the implications. The rebellion had been thinking too much like humans, using superior technology to win through better tactics and strategy. But their alien allies possessed capabilities that operated on entirely different principles. The war was about to become far stranger than anyone had anticipated. Grand Admiral Thekmore paced the length of his command bridge aboard the Imperial Super Dreadnought, Inevitable Dominance, his 6 legs clicking against the metal deck plating in a rhythm that betrayed his growing agitation. The holographic displays surrounding him showed the tactical situation across 17 star systems, and every single one painted the same picture. Imperial forces were being systematically dismantled by an enemy they could barely comprehend. "Status report," he commanded, his translator converting his rapid clicks and whistles into standard galactic clicks. Fleet Captain Yexnara consulted her tactical displays before responding. "We've lost contact with 3 more patrol squadrons in the Vega sector, the mining facility at Kepler. 2 has gone completely dark, and the supply convoy heading to the Centauri front has failed to report in for 12 hours. Thekmor's compound eyes focused on the strategic overview. Red markers indicated lost contact points scattered across Imperial space like a spreading infection. Each one represented hundreds or thousands of Imperial personnel who had simply vanished without sending so much as a distress signal. "What about the new detection grids?" he asked. "The ones designed to track fold space distortions?" "Ineffective, sir," Yexnara replied with obvious frustration. "The rebels appear to have developed new technologies that our sensors cannot detect. Intelligence suggests they're using something called phase space that operates on completely different principles from fold space navigation." The Grand Admiral's mandibles clicked in annoyance. Every time Imperial scientists developed countermeasures for one rebellion technology, the enemy would reveal another capability that made their previous advantages obsolete. It was like fighting an opponent who could rewrite the laws of physics at will. And the interrogation results from the captured rebel operatives? "Increasingly limited, sir. The latest prisoners appear to have some form of mental conditioning that prevents them from revealing operational details. When pressed, they simply..." Thekmor studied the tactical displays more carefully. The pattern of rebel attacks had changed dramatically over the past month. Instead of targeting obvious military installations, they were hitting seemingly random locations: asteroid mining stations, automated research facilities, even agricultural worlds that provided basic food supplies. But as he looked more closely, a disturbing pattern began to emerge. The attacks weren't random at all. They were systematically targeting the Empire's most fundamental infrastructure. Not the military bases that could be rebuilt quickly, but the industrial foundation that made Imperial civilization possible. "Captain," he said slowly, "bring up the economic analysis reports." The holographic displays shifted to show production statistics, resource flows, and supply chain analysis. What Thekmor saw made his chitin crawl with apprehension. The rebel attacks were creating cascading failures throughout the Imperial economy. The loss of a single mining facility would force 3 other installations to increase production to compensate. The destruction of a supply convoy would require 2 additional convoys to make up the shortfall. Each rebel victory was forcing the Empire to expend increasingly scarce resources just to maintain basic functionality. "They're not trying to destroy our military forces," Thekmor realized aloud. "They're trying to starve our entire civilization." Before Yexnara could respond, the communications array activated with an incoming priority transmission. The Imperial seal materialized above the central display, indicating a direct message from the core worlds. Emperor Vexthon's image appeared, but Thekmor was immediately struck by how much his ruler had changed since the rebellion began. The Emperor's exoskeleton, once polished to a mirror shine, now showed signs of stress fractures. His compound eyes darted nervously, and his mandibles twitched with barely controlled agitation. "Grand Admiral," the Emperor began without preamble, "I trust you have reviewed the latest intelligence reports."
"Yes, Your Imperial Majesty."
"The situation continues to deteriorate." "Deteriorate?" The Emperor's voice rose to a screech that made Thekmor's translator emit distortion signals. "Grand Admiral, we are losing this war. Not just losing battles or suffering setbacks, we are being systematically dismantled by primitives and their alien pets." Thekmor chose his words carefully. "Your Majesty, the enemy has proven more resourceful than our initial assessments suggested. However, our main battle fleets remain intact and our core territories are still secure." "Secure?" Emperor Vexthon's laughter was like the sound of grinding metal. "Grand Admiral, I have just received reports that the rebels have somehow infiltrated the Zephyrian homeworld itself. They have been conducting sabotage operations within our most secure facilities for weeks without detection." The shock of that statement nearly caused Thekmor to lose his balance. The Zephyrian homeworld was protected by more defensive installations than any other location in the galaxy. It was surrounded by automated defense platforms, patrolled by elite fleets, and monitored by sensor networks that could detect a single ship at the edge of the system.
How is that possible, Your Majesty? That, Grand Admiral, is exactly what I intend to discover.
I am authorizing the immediate deployment of Doomsday Protocol Omega. Thekmor felt his chitin go cold. Protocol Omega was the Empire's most extreme military response. The deployment of planet-killing weapons against any world that showed signs of rebellion or resistance. It had only been used 3 times in Imperial history, and each time had resulted in the complete sterilization of entire star systems. Your Majesty, with respect, Protocol Omega is designed for use against rebellious worlds, not against an enemy that has no fixed territory to attack. Then we will make them choose territory to defend, the Emperor snapped. Intelligence reports indicate that the human homeworld remains heavily populated. We will give the rebels a simple choice: surrender unconditionally or watch their species burn. The transmission ended, leaving Thekmor staring at the blank display. He had served the Empire for over 4 centuries, rising through the ranks by demonstrating unwavering loyalty and tactical brilliance. But for the first time in his long career, he found himself questioning whether his Emperor's orders were strategically sound. "Sir," Yexnera said quietly, "incoming transmission from Admiral Kethalov, the 7th Fleet." The hologram flickered to life again, revealing the weathered features of one of Thekmor's oldest colleagues. Admiral Kethalov had commanded fleets during the Valorian Conquest and the Synthati Purge. If anyone could provide reliable tactical assessment, it would be him. "Thekmor Kethal," said without preamble, "tell me you have some explanation for what happened at the Proxima research station."
"I haven't received reports from that sector yet."
"What happened?" Kethal's expression was grim. "The entire installation has been transformed into some kind of geometric art sculpture. Not destroyed, transformed. The metal structures have been reshaped into impossible configurations that seem to exist in more dimensions than our sensors can measure." The Core stared at his colleague. "That's impossible! Metal doesn't simply reshape itself. Tell that to the 12,000 personnel who are now part of the structure. They're alive, Thekmor. Our medical scanners confirm life signs throughout the sculpture, but they've been integrated into the metal somehow. They can still communicate, but they report that they're experiencing reality from multiple perspectives simultaneously." The implications of what he was hearing made Thekmor's mind reel. Which rebel species has that capability? Unknown. But there's more. The sculpture is broadcasting a continuous signal toward the core worlds. It's not a military transmission. It appears to be some form of poetry or artistic expression. Our xenolinguists are trying to translate it, but they say it contains concepts that don't exist in any known language. Before Thekmor could respond, alarms began sounding throughout his ship. The tactical displays immediately shifted to show multiple contact warnings at the edge of the system. "Sir," his sensor operator called out, "I'm detecting massive spatial distortions. Something is emerging from what appears to be a fold in space-time itself." The main view screen activated to show the incoming contacts. What Thekmor saw defied every principle of starship design he had ever learned. The vessels were enormous, easily twice the size of his own super dreadnought, but they seemed to be constructed from living crystal that pulsed with internal light. They moved through space like massive jellyfish swimming through an ocean of stars. "Unknown vessels, this is Grand Admiral Thekmor of the Imperial 7th Fleet," he transmitted on all frequencies. "You are entering restricted Imperial space. Identify yourselves immediately or face the consequences." The response came not through the communications array, but as a direct impression in his mind. The voice was ancient beyond measure, carrying the weight of eons and the wisdom of species long extinct. "I am consciousness that remembers stars of the Architect Collective. We have observed the conflict between your empire and the rebellion with growing interest. Your species has demonstrated remarkable efficiency at destruction, but you appear to lack understanding of creation. Thekmore struggled to maintain his composure. The Architect Collective was a myth, a legend whispered about in the deepest archives of Imperial history. They were supposedly the species that had built the fundamental infrastructure of galactic civilization. The hyperspace lanes, the gravitational anchor points, the cosmic engineering projects that made interstellar travel possible. But they had vanished millions of years ago, leaving behind only massive artifacts that no one understood. "What do you want?" Thekmore asked. "We want to observe. Your empire has spent millennia tearing down what others built. The rebellion seeks to build something new from the ruins. This conflict will determine whether this galaxy develops toward greater complexity and beauty or stagnates in endless cycles of conquest and oppression." Admiral Kethoval's transmission crackled with interference. "Thekmore, I'm reading similar contacts throughout the sector. These architects, they're appearing everywhere at once. My tactical officer estimates there are thousands of their vessels moving through Imperial space." The voice in Thekmore's mind continued with serene certainty. "Your Emperor plans to deploy planet-killing weapons against civilian populations. This action would represent a significant regression toward primitive barbarism. We cannot permit such regression to occur." "You cannot permit?" Thekmore found his voice rising to match the Emperor's earlier hysteria. "This galaxy belongs to the Zephyrian Empire. Your species abandoned it millions of years ago. We did not abandon it. We transcended the need for direct intervention. But transcendence includes the responsibility to prevent younger species from destroying what we helped create. The rebellion represents evolution toward greater sophistication. The Empire represents devolution toward simpler brutality." Through the tactical displays, Thekmore could see more Architect vessels materializing throughout the system. They weren't deploying in attack formations. Instead, they seemed to be positioning themselves between Imperial forces and potential targets. It was as if they were creating a barrier to prevent Imperial military action. "Sir," Yexnera reported with growing alarm, "I'm receiving similar reports from fleets throughout Imperial space. The Architects have appeared in every major system simultaneously. They're not attacking, but they're preventing our ships from conducting any offensive operations." The voice in Thekmore's mind took on a tone of patient instruction. "Your empire will not be destroyed, Grand Admiral, but it will be contained until it learns to channel its energies toward creation rather than destruction. The rebellion will be given time and space to develop new forms of civilization. And if we refuse to accept this containment, then you will discover what it means to face opposition from a species that engineers reality itself. We built the cosmic infrastructure that your ships use to travel between stars. Removing that infrastructure would strand your fleets wherever they currently happen to be positioned. The threat was delivered without malice or anger, simply as a statement of fact. The Architects possessed the power to cripple Imperial civilization without firing a single shot. Admiral Kethval's voice crackled through the interference again. "Thekmore, I'm receiving orders from the Emperor to ignore the Architect presence and proceed with Protocol Omega preparations. What are your instructions?" Thekmore looked around his bridge at the officers who had served under him for decades. They were waiting for him to give orders that would either save the Empire or doom it. For the first time in his career, he found himself truly uncertain about what course of action would serve his people best. "Admiral," he finally said, "stand down Protocol Omega preparations until further notice." "Sir?" Kethel's confusion was evident even through the static. "I need time to assess the tactical situation. The presence of the Architect Collective changes every strategic calculation we've made." As he closed the communication link, Thekmore realized that he was effectively disobeying direct orders from the Emperor. But the alternative was to trigger a conflict with beings whose technology was so advanced that they might as well have been gods. The rebellion had found allies that could checkmate the Empire without even trying. The war was over not because humanity had won, but because forces beyond either species had decided that the conflict needed to end. The question now was whether the Empire would accept this new reality or destroy itself trying to fight the inevitable. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the observation deck of the UCS Harmony, watching as the massive structure took shape in the space between Earth and Mars. The construction project was unlike anything humanity had ever attempted, a space station the size of a small moon, built using architectural principles provided by the Architect Collective and powered by technologies that blended human engineering with the wisdom of a dozen alien civilizations. "The Galactic Assembly Station is truly remarkable," commented Ambassador Zephyr, the Etherian's translucent form shimmering in the reflected light from the construction. "It will serve as a symbol of what can be accomplished when species choose cooperation over conquest." Chen nodded, though her expression remained thoughtful. 6 months had passed since the architect intervention had effectively ended the war, but the work of building peace was proving far more complex than the work of fighting battles. "Any word from the Zephyrian delegation?" she asked. "They remain in deliberation," replied War Leader Gorthak from his position near the viewport. The massive Valorian had insisted on personally overseeing the security arrangements for the peace negotiations, despite the fact that the architects had made violence virtually impossible within the station's vicinity. Dr. Chris Elena Vasquez approached from the communications center, carrying a tablet filled with the latest reports from across what had once been Imperial space. "The situation continues to be complicated. 17 Imperial governors have declared their systems independent republics, 23 more have formed regional alliances, and at least 40 worlds are still trying to maintain loyalty to Emperor Vexthan." Chen sighed. The collapse of imperial authority had been sudden and dramatic, but it hadn't automatically resulted in peaceful transitions. Many worlds that had been conquered centuries ago were now free to determine their own governments, but freedom didn't automatically provide the infrastructure, resources, or knowledge needed to build functioning societies. "What about the refugee situation?" "Mixed results," Elena replied, consulting her notes. "The Kephrite colonies have agreed to accept displaced Zephyrian civilians, but they're struggling with the cultural integration. The Sindathi have established several sanctuary worlds, but their reality manipulation technology makes some refugees uncomfortable, and the Etherians," she paused, struggling to find the right words. "The Etherians have offered to help traumatize populations by sharing their consciousness temporarily," Ambassador Zephyr explained. "This allows damaged minds to heal within a collective awareness that provides perspective on suffering. However, many beings find the concept disturbing." Chen understood the difficulty. Each species had developed different solutions to the problems created by the Empire's collapse, but not every solution was acceptable to every culture. Building a truly inclusive galactic civilization would require more than just ending the war. It would require creating new forms of cooperation that had never existed before. "Admiral," came a voice from the intercom, incoming priority transmission from the Zephyrian core worlds. "It's Emperor Vexthan himself." Chen exchanged glances with her advisors before moving to the main communications center. The peace negotiations had been going on for weeks, but this was the first time the Emperor had personally participated in any discussions. The holographic display activated to reveal the Zephyrian ruler, but Chen was shocked by what she saw. Emperor Vexthan's exoskeleton showed extensive stress fractures, and his compound eyes held a quality of desperate exhaustion that spoke of sleepless weeks. The being who had once commanded the loyalty of trillions now looked fragile and uncertain. "Admiral Chen," he began, his translator rendering his clicks and whistles into weary words, "I am prepared to discuss terms."
"Your Imperial Majesty," Chen replied formally.
"We welcome your participation in the peace process. What terms did you have in mind?" Vexthan's mandibles twitched in what might have been bitter amusement. "Terms? Admiral, I am no longer in a position to negotiate terms. I am requesting sanctuary." The statement hung in the air like a physical presence. Chen had expected eventual surrender, perhaps even abdication, but the idea that the Emperor himself would request protection hadn't occurred to her. "Sanctuary from whom, Your Majesty?" "From my own people," Vexthan replied with obvious difficulty. "The Empire is fragmenting, Admiral. Not just politically, but culturally. There are factions within Zephyrian space that blame me for the war's outcome. There are others that blame me for starting the war in the first place, and there are still others that believe the only way to restore Imperial honor is through my public execution. Elena leaned forward. What kind of sanctuary are you requesting? I wish to formally surrender myself to the authority of the Galactic Assembly. In exchange for protection and a fair trial under whatever legal framework you establish, I am prepared to provide complete access to Imperial archives, military codes, and governmental databases. Chen felt the weight of history pressing down on her shoulders. The decision she made in the next few minutes would shape galactic politics for generations to come. Execute the Emperor, and he would become a martyr for Imperial loyalists. Protect him, and she would be accused of showing mercy to a tyrant responsible for countless atrocities. I need to consult with the other assembly delegates, she said finally. Can you maintain your position safely until we reach a decision? For perhaps another 48 hours, Vex then replied. After that, the Loyalist fleets will likely attempt to either rescue me or eliminate me as a liability. As the transmission ended, Chen found herself facing a room full of alien advisors whose expressions ranged from satisfaction to outright hostility. The Emperor's crimes cannot be forgiven, War Leader Gorthak rumbled. My people have waited 8 centuries for justice against the being who ordered the destruction of our homeworld. Justice and vengeance are not the same thing, Ambassador Zephain replied serenely. The Etherians believe that true justice involves understanding the circumstances that led to harmful actions, not simply punishing the actors. Elena consulted her tablet again. From a practical standpoint, Emperor Vexthon's knowledge could be invaluable for reconstruction efforts. Imperial administrative systems are incredibly complex, and many worlds don't have the expertise to manage their own infrastructure without guidance. Chen considered the options. The easy choice would be to refuse sanctuary and let Zephyrian politics resolve the Emperor's fate, but the Assembly was supposed to represent a new approach to galactic governance, one based on law and cooperation rather than might and revenge. Schedule an emergency session of the Assembly, she decided. This decision is too important for any single species to make alone. The Galactic Assembly Station's main chamber was a marvel of cooperative engineering. Atmospheric zones accommodated species with different environmental needs. Translation systems allowed for communication across dozens of languages. Gravity generators created comfortable conditions for beings evolved under different planetary conditions. Representatives from 47 species gathered to debate the Emperor's request for sanctuary. Chen listened as arguments flowed back and forth, each delegation bringing their own cultural perspectives and historical grievances to the discussion. The Valorians demanded justice for the destruction of their civilization. The Kefrits called for mercy based on their religious principles. The Sindhati suggested that reality could be altered to make the Emperor experience the suffering he had caused others. The debate continued for hours without resolution. Finally, consciousness that remembers stars of the Architect Collective spoke from their crystalline observation platform. We have observed the development of galactic civilization for millions of years. This moment represents a critical decision point. The chamber fell silent as the ancient being continued. Civilizations that choose vengeance over justice eventually destroy themselves through endless cycles of retaliation. Civilizations that choose justice over vengeance develop the wisdom to prevent future conflicts. Chen stood to address the assembly. The Emperor's request forces us to decide what kind of civilization we want to build. Do we want one based on the principle that might makes right, or one based on the principle that even former enemies deserve fair treatment under law? The debate resumed, but with a different tone. Instead of arguing about what the Emperor deserved, the delegates began discussing what kind of precedent they wanted to establish for future conflicts. The vote, when it finally came, was closer than Chen had expected. 26 species voted to grant sanctuary, 19 voted to refuse it, and 2 abstained. It wasn't overwhelming support, but it was enough to establish the Assembly's authority over matters of galactic justice. Emperor Vexthon arrived at the station under heavy escort, his personal transport flanked by ships from a dozen different species. Chen met him at the docking bay, along with representatives from the Assembly's newly created legal council. The emperor who disembarked was a far different being from the one who had once commanded galactic conquest. His movements were slow and careful, and he kept his compound eyes focused on the deck plating as if unable to meet anyone's gaze. "Your Imperial Majesty," Chen said formally, "by vote of the Galactic Assembly, you are granted sanctuary under Assembly authority. You will be provided with comfortable quarters and legal representation while we establish the framework for your trial." Vexthon's mandibles clicked in what might have been gratitude. "Thank you, Admiral. I understand that this decision was not made lightly." "No, it wasn't," Chen replied. "Many of the delegates lost friends, family members, and entire worlds to imperial conquest. They chose to support this decision not because they've forgiven those crimes, but because they believe that justice served fairly is more important than justice served quickly." As the former emperor was escorted to his quarters, Chen reflected on how much had changed since the first imperial ships had appeared over Earth. Humanity had gone from being an insignificant species facing extinction to being a founding member of the most diverse political alliance in galactic history. Dr. Elena Vasquez joined her at the observation deck overlooking the station's central courtyard. Below them, beings from dozens of species worked together on everything from infrastructure maintenance to cultural exchange programs. "Do you think it will work?" Alan asked. "This whole experiment in cooperative government?" Chen watched as a group of young Zephyrians, refugees from worlds that had rejected imperial authority, played alongside human children in the station's recreational areas. The former enemies were learning each other's games, sharing each other's foods, and gradually developing the kinds of friendships that would make future wars impossible. "I think," Chen said slowly, "that we've learned something important about the nature of strength. The Empire was strong because it could destroy things, but we're strong because we can build things. And what we're building here, this alliance, this legal framework, this new form of civilization, it's going to outlast any empire based on conquest." Through the station's transparent walls, she could see ships from across the galaxy arriving and departing in a constant stream. Trade vessels carrying goods between worlds that had never previously been allowed to communicate directly. Research ships crewed by mixed-species teams working to solve problems that no single civilization could handle alone. And most importantly, diplomatic ships carrying representatives who were learning that their differences could be sources of strength rather than causes for conflict. The Galactic Empire had fallen not because it was militarily defeated, but because it had become obsolete. In a galaxy where species could choose cooperation over conquest, the Empire's model of governance through fear and oppression simply couldn't compete with the Assembly's model of governance through mutual benefit and shared responsibility. Humanity had provoked the Empire by refusing to surrender their freedom. The Empire had paid the price by losing everything that had made it powerful in the first place. And from the ruins of that ancient tyranny, something entirely new was being born. A civilization that would judge its success not by how many worlds it could conquer, but by how many species it could help flourish. The age of empire was over. The age of assembly had begun. Years later, historians would mark the day Emperor Vexthon requested sanctuary as the true end of the Galactic War. Not because it ended the fighting, that had happened months earlier when the architects intervened, but because it demonstrated that even the most powerful tyrant could be brought to justice through law rather than violence. The trial that followed would establish precedents for galactic jurisprudence that would endure for millennia. The reconstruction efforts that emerged from the assembly would create prosperity on scales never before imagined. And the alliance between humanity and its alien partners would eventually spread to encompass every inhabited world in the galaxy. But perhaps most importantly, the war had taught every species in the galaxy a lesson that would prevent similar conflicts from ever arising again. That true strength doesn't come from the ability to destroy your enemies, but from the wisdom to turn your enemies into friends.